Hi, DJ from Pro Action here. Today we're working on a 2019 Harley-Davidson Road Glide. We're going to take the forks off. We're going to take them over to Eric. He's going to show you how to tear your forks down. We're going to compare the difference between your stock forks and the Pro Action kit we're going to put in. Then we're going to show you how to install the kit. So let's take our forks. Let's go over to Eric and let's see how to tear these babies down. Okay, we brought the fork over for Eric. He's going to put it in the vise there and tear it down. So first thing you need to do is find a good solid place to put it. You're going to mount it in the vise. You're going to mount it, make sure you have some aluminum jaws, something to protect your fork. You know, once you mount it in the vise, we don't want to tear the chrome up. You don't want to cause any damage to the fork. First thing he's going to do is take the cap off. Now that is a 19mm socket. So take the cap off. Now set your parts aside. You kind of set them in order so you know how they come out. That way it'll make it easier on you when they go back in. So we're going to put them in the cleaning tank. Make sure you clean everything, wipe it down, take a little contact cleaner, get the oil residue off. Clean everything up before we go back together. Now we're going to dump the oil. See, the oil has a little bit of wear to it. Usually a new bike or clean oil will be a little more on the clear side or a little more bluish. You can see kind of the dark tint in that one. Now when you dump it out, you're going to have a spacer, you'll have a couple washers. Just make sure you save all that stuff and set it aside. Next step, there is a 12mm Allen in the bottom of the fork. This is what holds in the dampening rod and keeps the internals of the fork secure. So at this point, he's going to take an air wrench. We're going to spin the 12mm bolt out of the bottom. Get yourself, when you hit the air, sometimes you'll have to kind of snap it a couple times, to break that bolt loose. If you're using a regular handheld wrench, you'll feel it'll start loosening up. You may have to take something, stick down into the top of the fork just to kind of secure the rod a little bit. Think of like the handle of a broomstick, a piece of PVC, just something to, just put a little pressure on it while you take the bolt out. So now we have the bolt out. He's just dumping out. There comes your spring. There's the stock spring. Behind the spring, you're going to find the stock damping rod. And that's about it for the internals. And take your fork tubes, pump them in and out a couple times, get all the old oil pumped out of them. Then at this point, clean all your parts, get them laid out, and we'll be ready for the next step. Now that we have the fork apart, we have everything cleaned. I just want to lay the parts out, the stock parts compared to the Pro Action parts, kind of show you what's inside there, the order in which it came out, how to, what you need to change, and how to put that back together. So if we look here, this is a stock. This is what came out of its stock originally. We have a dampening rod with a negative spring on it. We have the stock fork. We have a washer that goes on top of the spring. And then we have the metal preload spacer that goes between the spring and the cap. This is what controls how much pressure is on the spring as the forks are extended. So the difference here, this is a Pro Action kit. When you get your fork kit, first thing to do is take your Pro Action dampening rod, compare it to your stock rod, make sure they're both the same length. That way we make sure the length of the fork is going to be consistent. We're not going to lower you down any, and everything's going to be the same. We do offer a lowering kit. We can drop your forks 1 inch if that's something you would like to do. That'll be in the next video. So take your stock dampening rod. There is a wear band on the top, a plastic wear band. We're going to take that wear band off the stock rod. We're going to put it on the Pro Action rod. There's a groove on the top, just slides in there. Now there's notches in the groove. Make sure the notches are facing up, kind of just like you took it off. We're going to take the negative spring. We're going to put it on the Pro Action rod. Now the difference here, if you kind of look at the stock rod, this is your stock dampening rod. We have one hole through the bottom. So if you kind of picture the inside of the fork, as that fork's coming down, all that oil is bleeding through those 2 holes. So there's nothing really to hold you up. It's free bleeding the whole way down. So you're falling down, falling down. The fork finally covers up those holes to slow the flow down. Now it's trying to, kind of stiffen the fork up for you, kind of prevent bottoming. We've had all this room to go down with nothing happening. So when it gets to the bottom, it's too late. It tries to catch it. That's why it kind of goes down real fast. You get to the bottom, then it catches for a second, then kind of falls on its face. That's why you experience so much dive under braking. When you hit a bump, that's why the wheel comes up. You don't feel it until it gets to the mid-stroke. It kind of gets a little harsh on you there. The difference in the Pro Action rod compared to the stock rod, we do 2 sets of holes. And if you notice, the first set of holes is up a little higher, and they're smaller than the holes in the standard rod. Then we do another set of holes up towards the top. So if you can kind of picture the fork working, On the top of the first third of the stroke, everything's wide open, it's free bleeding, it's picking up the vibration, the road noise, the small bumps. A third of the way through the travel, we cover up the first set of holes, it gets stiffer. 2/3 of the way through, we cover up the second set of holes, it gets stiffer yet. Then we have that space at the bottom like a bottoming cone. So as it's coming down, it progressively gets stiffer. It builds a little pressure at the top, builds a little more in the mid-stroke. Then we have the bottoming cone, or the what we consider a bottoming cone on the bottom to keep everything from bottoming. So with the Pro Action setup, change your wear band, put the negative spring on. The next thing that will win the fork, it'll be the Pro Action spring. And if you notice, the Pro Action spring is about 1 inch shorter than the stock spring. These springs are right about twice the standard rate. Even though they're a stiffer spring, it's going to hold you up a little more in the travel. It's going to let it work smoother through the travel. When you jump on the brakes, the front end's not going to dive on you. When you come into the corner, it's not going to be all swirly on you coming through the corner. It'll carve the corner real nice. It'll hold the front end up, and it's going to resist bottoming. Past that point, we'll give you a washer. We can include 2 of these washers in with the set. You really only need 1. The washer will go on top of the spring. Then we have the Pro Action preload spacer. Pro Action preload spacer goes on top. Once we drop that in the fork, the next thing would be the cap on top of it. So this is kind of the order of what you would have inside your fork. So if you get a little confused, get all your parts laid out, you can look back at this and, kind of see how we have it laid out. So these are the internals. Everything's cleaned. We're going to go over now back to the suspension department now. We're going to rebuild these forks. Okay, the forks we're working with are 49mm forks. This is basically what comes stock inside your 49mm forks. A lot of the 41mm forks will have a valve inside. Now this valve will sit right on top of your dampening rod. Then the stock spring will go right on top of the valve this way. Now a lot of people call as they're installing their kits, they get a little confused with this valve. Remove the valve. Once you're building your forks, when it's in there, take that thing out, set it aside. We don't need it anymore. It's one of the parts that comes stock, but we're actually not using with the Pro Action setup. It actually hinders the performance of the Pro Action setup. So I just wanted to be clear, you don't need it. Okay, we're back over in the suspension department. We're going to install the Pro Action internals inside these Harley-Davidson forks. First thing you do, like we mentioned in the previous, we're going to take the wear band off the stock rod. We're going to put it on the Pro Action rod. We took the negative spring off the stock rod. We already have that on the Pro Action rod. Now we're going to put it inside the fork. Now make sure your fork's collapsed. Make sure everything's collapsed and kind of tight down. There's actually a bottoming cone that sets in between this tube and the bottom tube. So make sure everything's seated, everything's collapsed and tight. Now you noticed Eric just dropped the rod down in there. We put the rod goes down in, small end first, big end towards the top, just like you took it out. After we drop the rod in there, we drop the spring down in. Use your spring, put it in there, let it, put a little, just bump it around a little bit. That will seat the rod. And the next step, Eric's taking a preload spacer, just putting it in there. Now we know everything's seated tightly. At this point, we're going to take the 12mm Allen that we took out originally. We're going to run that back in and tighten it up. Just put a little bit of pressure on the spring to hold everything tight as you put the bolt in the bottom. Okay, next step is going to be setting the preload and filling it with oil. Okay, we have all the internals installed in the fork. Next step, drop your fork spring in. Then we're going to put the washer in. It's supplied by Pro Action. The next step is your preload tube. It's a white preload tube, plastic. It comes with the kit. We're going to drop it in the fork. Then at this point, take the fork out of the vise and extend the tube. So we're going to make sure that the tube's fully extended, that the fork's as long as it can possibly be. On this particular fork, which is 49mm Showa, we're going to set the preload at a 1/2 inch above the top of the tube. So Eric's measuring, going to put a little mark there. So now, once we put the cap on, we cut the tube, we put the cap on, that's going to give us, that's going to set the preload where it needs to be in the spring. So at this point, take your plastic tube back out, cut it off where you marked it. Okay, we've cut the preload tube. This is what your final assembly will look like. Right before we put the cap on, you can see the tube is inside the fork's extended, and we have a 1/2 inch sticking out the top. So everything's good there. The next step is going to be to fill the fork with oil, then finish the assembly. At this point, take your preload spacer back out, take the washer out, and take the spring out. Okay, now we're going to fill with oil. Make sure the tube's collapsed, compress the whole way. and we're going to use a 20 weight fork oil. It doesn't have to be a fork fluid. It can be a fork oil. We recommend a high quality oil like Maxima, Bel-Ray, even the Harley-Davidson oil, is a good oil. Just make sure, the key is to make sure it's a 20 weight. At this point, dump your fork fluid in. Now the level that we set the fork fluid is going to vary from bike to bike. We want to look up for your particular application, and we want to use the maximum level recommended by Harley-Davidson for in that fork. So use a maximum oil level each time. In these particular 49 millimeter forks, we're going to set the airspace. That means from the top of the fork to the top of the oil, we're going to measure that space, and that's where we're going to set the oil level. On this particular fork, it's 95 millimeters. So once you have the oil in, we're going to bleed the fork. You see Eric's kind of pumping it up and down a little bit. That'll bring all the oil in between the tubes, in through the cartridge, get out all the air bubbles. Once you take that tube, move it in and out, 4 or 5 times, 6 times, real slowly. You can feel the pressure. When the pressure's all even, moving it up and down. At that point, we'll be ready to set the oil level. Okay, we have the oil in the fork. We filled the fork with 20 weight oil. We're going to fill it a little past, a little fuller than it needs to be at this point. And then we're going to take the fork oil gauge, and we're going to suck the oil out until it's down to the 95 millimeter level. So the amount of the rod that's sticking out below the top is 95 millimeters. What Eric's doing now, as we're bringing the oil out, once it gets to the top and the bulb fills up, when you hear that noise, your oil level is at 95 millimeters. You can also do that with a ruler. You can make yourself a little gauge to stick down in there. You have to make sure the difference with the fork collapsed, that the top of the oil is 95 millimeters or the recommended Harley amount of oil from the top of the tube to the top of the oil. So at this point, we have our oil level set. We're going to drop the spring back in. And make sure you set the oil level without the spring out. And the next step is put the washer. The washer will go between the spring and the plastic preload spacer. Then there's your preload spacer. At this point, extend the tube. And now, all we have to do is put the cap in. Now the cap's threaded. That was a 19 millimeter on top. Use your ratchet. Now you're gonna have to put a little pressure behind it. You're gonna have to lean on it a little hard, get down to where the threads will catch, because we have the preload. Once you get the thread started, tighten it up. And at this point, you have just professionally installed your Pro Action fork kit. Now we're going to take the fork and put it back on the bike. Okay, it's time to put the forks back on the bike. We've completed the build. Everything's ready. Follow your Harley-Davidson instructions for torque specs and how to remount your suspension on the motorcycle. Once it's mounted on the bike, you're good to go. You're ready to go out and enjoy the ride. If you have any trouble installing the fork kit, if you have any questions, if you're uncomfortable with any part of it, please give us a call at Pro Action. We'll be more than happy to guide you through it.